Hello. In today's video, we will talk about gynocentrism. But first of all, let's summarize what has been covered so far in this series. In part 1, we talked about female solipsism, and in part 2, we talked about hypergamy. Today, we will talk about gynocentrism as it applies to women, but since we're about to understand women, we might as well cover gynocentrism in men and how that affects and shapes society as we know it. So let's start with simple concepts first of all. The influence and the power that women hold in society as it is through the effect they have on men. The fact that women can now vote, hold a full-time job, get a good education and affect legislation directly is something that only came to the picture less than 100 years ago. So we don't even have a century of direct female influence in terms of legislation. However, what we do have a long history of is over 100,000 years of indirect female influence through the influence they exerted on men. This is how gynocentrism has always exerted its influence on society. I personally believe that every human being, despite their genitals, should have access to good education, and that every human being should not have direct access to voting just because he or she has a heartbeat. Therefore, I do not believe any of those things are necessarily bad if people were to vote using their brain and not their emotions. We're unlucky though as humans because that is exactly what most people do, and it leads to the society we're now experiencing. In this video, I will first describe gynocentrism from the point of view of a man and then from the point of view of a woman. Every aspect of this video borrows from concepts and expands on them from previous videos made for this series. So again, watch the other videos on the playlist before proceeding. The idea is that we're building on concepts from basic to more complicated topics, therefore do the background reading first. It's been said before, but let it be said again. Eggs are expensive, but sperm is dirt cheap. Gynocentrism has its roots on understanding that the limiting factor to reproduction is the female of our species. Therefore, in evolutionary terms, eggs and wombs must be preserved above all else to guarantee that at least some men will reproduce. Preservation of the species is something that people quote all the time, but that is misunderstanding evolution. The species, which in this case is the human species, has no self-interest in and of itself. There is no entity called species when we go down to the level of the DNA and the selfish gene. So in evolutionary terms, we're always dealing with individuals and the selfish desire to preserve their DNA in the next generation. Therefore, me and you and all of your ancestors before you, on evolutionary terms, never cared about the species, but cared about their own reproduction. Despite that fact, individual traits that are beneficial are inherited from generation to generation, so much so that they appear to be found universally amongst all the individuals in the human species. It would seem to be that prioritizing and protecting women is a trait that is quite beneficial if you want to protect your woman, your future women, and anyone around you who could cook up your seed into a full living person if you're a man. That is why such a trait would have been positively selected, as it would ensure that people with these traits would have females around to reproduce with. Gynocentrism is a universal in both the male and the female of our species. Though it may be described by different names, when it comes to women, gynocentrism is certainly a trait that is exhibited by them as well. The female collective, the female Borg, or by extent feminism, they all describe gynocentrism as it plays on the social scale. Women are first of all solipsistic, but they're also gynocentric. They will support female causes and will also support each other. Any attack on any woman is taken as an attack on the female kind. Men, on the other hand, do not display such a preference when it comes to men, as they would have to compete with those very same men within their group for women. However, they're indeed very gynocentric in their thoughts and their actions when it comes to women. At this point, it must be obvious that the male of our species displays preference towards the female of our species over his own self. It's always women and children first. It's always men that you hear sacrificing themselves for their family. It's men that jump in front of bullets to protect women. It is also men that vote legislation that helps women primarily over men. Men have always ensured that the weaker of the sexes is provided for, is cared for, and is protected, not just on a personal level, but also on a state level. If we are to take this emotion to the extreme, men, and you see this specifically with white nationalists, they consider women, all women in their perceived social group, as theirs, and they consider it their job to protect these women. No matter how extreme the views these people display on everything else, protecting women and children seems to be an almost reasonable opinion. Well, you know, if you are to, of course, ignore equality, the fact that women only want protection if their independence is put at risk, and the fact that these same women have been telling these men to fuck off for almost 100 years. Then it might become reasonable, let's say, for red pill standards as well. Yes, it is indeed the primary imperative of men to put women first. However, the same imperative exists in women as well, without the sacrificial element to it though. You see, women know that the most valuable resource that they possess is their womb, and they make every effort to protect that valuable resource. They want that valuable resource to be independently provided to the men deemed worthy to use it. The resource therefore to women is their sexuality and their ability to continue being the gateway to reproduction. Crimes against this almost unspoken and unbreakable rule are heavily punished. Rape, for example, is heavily punished under the law, and men have even been killed by crowds on the presumption that they raped a woman. There is a public outcry in rape cases which combines the protective instinct of men over women and also the protective instinct of women over their most valuable resource, the golden uterus. Women will also vividly oppose anything that might surrender the control that they have over their own bodies. Planned marriages, for example, are vividly opposed in Western society, but is not, of course, a universal everywhere just yet. Women want to have the ability to choose. They want to sample and choose. Threats to the status quo are also opposed. There seems to be an almost strong sense of nationalism during wartime, with women prompting men to fight for them and protect them. Of course, their gynocentrism would not allow them, if those men are deemed unworthy and lose the war, for example, to allow their precious gift to go to waste. These women would get totally assimilated into the new reality if a new order takes place. The war brides is a good example of that, where women would quickly accept and adopt this newfound reality, sleep and start families with their old enemies. This has been going on since the beginning of time and has been observed all over history. Gynocentrism would not allow women to die in as vast numbers as men in times of war, and hypergamy would not allow their precious gift to go to waste when high-quality men are around them. I mean, the real question is, why do content producers such as myself mention gynocentrism and focus on it as much as they do? It is because gynocentrism implies something very primitive inside the human ape, the primitive need to protect and look after the women and the young. This need has allowed for civilizations to flourish and for societies to be built to ensure their survival and protection. Talking about gynocentrism allows for us to explain the innate nature of the man to protect women and to prioritize them over himself at times. It also explains why women prioritize their own selves and the female collective as a whole. It is an instinct that has shaped civilizations and can be seen in the decisions that lawmakers make in every facet of society. This aspect of the human ape explains why feminism is not the real problem here, but rather the nature of man and the nature of woman. A man will appease and protect women to allow for reproduction to ensure, and a woman will prioritize herself and push for even more rights that ensures her survival and independence as far as reproduction goes. When gynocentrism is allowed to flourish to the level that it has, it leads to a civilization to reach the state that it has now. If the worst thing you could do to a person in evolutionary terms is death prior to reproduction, many more men have perished than women have. The human ape has always been gynocentric. When gynocentrism is stripped down to its bare essentials, it is simply the protective instinct found in both men and women over the golden uterus of the human species. That's all it is. When the conditions are right, civilizations are stable, when there are no wars, no external threats, and the uterus can be protected without much investment from the point of view of a man, this instinct forms the social conditions of present time. It is not Marxism, it is not feminism, they are merely symptoms, and the conditions that has caused them is merely our own human nature. Are these instincts maladaptive? Perhaps they are, but they're here to stay. That's all I had to say. Thank you very much for listening.